Hello and welcome back to another episode of Let's Build an E-commerce Store with a Spring Boot Backend. Episode 13, we're going to be focusing on unit testing. This is the third installment, the third part of unit testing. So if you haven't seen part 1 or part 2, which is episode 11 and 12 respectively, make sure to go back and watch those. As always, the code base, the code link is in the description for GitHub, so you can see both the start of the episode and the end of the episode. But without further ado, let's get straight into the code. Okay, so here we are, back in our development environment, ready for another session of unit test programming. Okay, so what we're first going to do is we're going to do a very basic mock of the Spring MVC framework to show you guys how to do the initial one, and then we're going to get into slightly more complicated stuff where we actually have to have users defined when we're creating it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to recreate our package structure from above here. So we've got API dot controller dot and then product. We're going to do the product one because the product one is pretty simple. It's no authentication on it. It's just kind of open for everyone. So we're going to create a new Java class in there called product test. And then just like before, we're going to annotate this with @springboot-test. Now, there's another thing we also have to add here, and that's @autoconfigure mock MVC. And what this will do is it tells Spring, hey, I want to use the MVC framework for my unit testing here. But to be able to do that, I need you to create me a way of being able to communicate with it. So what it will do is allow you to auto-wire a class called mockMVC. Or should I say, I think it's an interface. No, it is a class. Okay. So it allows you to auto-wire an MVC object. Now that will allow us then to be able to do all of our get, post, all those sort of like HTTP calls onto our code without having to launch up a server and have Postman communicate. This will do it for us. So again, we're going to do @test, and this time we're not editing any data, so we don't need to put transactional in there. But then we can go public void test product list. And at the moment, it doesn't do anything too special. So if we look at our products controller, all it's doing is basically just going product service get products. Now we're obviously going to JUnit that when that becomes more of a complex method, and just like this, well, there's not much complex logic to this. So really, all we need to JUnit does it actually pass something back? So we can do this by going mvc.perform. And then we import a static method called get. We'll do that in a second. And and this is where we put our path. So it's /product. So remember in Postman, we would put /product at the end of the URL to be able to get to this area. And then we can import this. So there's a static method. What we're doing here? Hold up. There's a static method that is in mock MVC request builders. If I can find it. I'll tell you what, let me copy it from this other screen I have here. Usually it's smart enough to kind of just dump it straight away, but it doesn't seem to have done that. But there you go, you can see this import org spring framework test web servlet request mock MVC request builders, and then get is the method we're importing from there. And then this perform can throw an exception, so we're just going to let it throw to the method signature because we don't really need to worry if it is throwing it. Then there's something else that we need to be worrying about as opposed to reporting it as a failure. And then there's and then you do .expect, and this is where you go, right, so you're going to perform this get method, and then you'll want you to expect something. So we're going to expect the status, which is this little static method you can import, which I'm going to double check here, mock MVC result matches. Yep, there we go. So it's the status method from mock MVC result matches. we can go status dot is, and then we go our HTTP status code dot, oh, HTTP status, sorry, dot, and then we're looking for OK dot value. Just import that as well. Okay, so let's review this. So what we're doing is we're using our mocked MVC, and we're saying please perform a get action on /product, and when that does happen, please expect the status to be OK. So it's a pretty simple test, right? So let's run this file now. I keep pressing the debug. There we go. So let's run this file now, and it's building, parsing. Come on, here we go. So Spring's initializing as we see before. As you can see, we've got a green tick and it's all okay. That means we've queried it and it's come back all good. That's really good news. What we could do is if we say bad request, we can see what it looks like if there is a failure. So now it's going to run. We'll run it again, and as you can see, it's initializing. And here we go. We get an error. And when it fails, the thing that's really handy about this mock MVC, so not only do we just get the usual, oh well, we expected this from our JUnit, and the assertion actually gave us this, so there's something wrong. But we actually get this little bit of text here, which if I expand it, you can see better. We can see exactly what the request was, all of the little attributes and properties and headers that were sent with it. And we can see the full response as well, so all the information. So when you've got a JUnit that's failing, you can come in here and you can actually see a bit more information than you need, than you originally had, to be able to kind of diagnose it. Which, if you were on the Postman, you may that this information may be available, but this is going to be a bit easier because it's direct to exactly what you want. But yeah, so I mean, obviously, also Postman's all manual. This is automated, which is nice. So let's change that back to OK. So that's the product one. The other controllers we have are based on properties that are security based, minus the login registration one. So let's do the authentication controller, and then the order controller we'll do as part 4 of the unit tests. So authentication controller, because the user stuff is going to take a little bit more work. So we're going to need a new package here under controller. We've got what was it, auth, I believe. Yep, and we've got authentication controller here. So we're going to create a new class called authentication controller test. And in here, we're going to need to test the bits of logic that we have in here. So we've got a few different endpoints. So let's start with our register endpoint. So again, we're going to go at springboot test and at auto configure mock MVC. And when we've got the register user, what do we do? So we take it in the registration body and we make sure that it's valid. So we need to test that. If the user is, if the register happens, then it returns an OK. If the user already exists, it returns a conflict. And if the email failure exception, it returns an internal server error. Now, it can be argued two different ways of what we do and don't need to test here. Because we have already tested this register user method in our user service test, and we've tested that the user exception appears when we expect it to, it can be argued that you don't need to test this section here, because you know that this is going to be thrown from this record, this method call, whenever you call it in the correct way to cause that. You know that's going to be called, so you know that this is going to be hit. So me personally, I would agree that we don't need to test these lines of code because we know that it is going to be triggered and we know that it's going to return OK. If this was doing something a little bit more complex than just returning a status, then I would definitely argue that yes, it would be a better idea to test it. Because when you think about it, this line of code, responsiveness status, HTTP status, conflict build, there's no way that's going to fail because we're using similar things all over our code, right? And that will be tested elsewhere. But if we had some more complex thing in here where it was like, you know, you've got to build up some objects or read or write some data from a file or database, well, there's a lot more logic there that could go wrong. So you would want to test that. So for us, we're just going to test, does this valid, this at valid here, does this trigger when we provide invalid data? And on top of that, when we provide the correct data, do we get our OK returned? So let's tackle that. So public void test invalid test register. Okay, and then we do at test above it, and at transactional just in case any data gets saved, so it breaks it out after. So as before in our product test, we're going to do a perform. So let's do that. Oh yes, we need to auto wire our mock MVC. Sorry, mock MVC. I'll make that private, and then we're going to go MVC.perform, and this time we're doing a post because if we look at our authentication controller, it's a post mapping. Post, and then that's /auth/register because we've got up here our request mapping is auth, and then our post mapping is register, and we can then import the static method, the same one from before, and then we want to also catch that exception, throw it to the message signature, and then what we want to do is also we want to do with build somewhere in here we want to set the body, but I can't remember for the life of me. Where is it? Build request. Oh dear, you know, this happens all the time. You start doing something, you completely forget it. So let's quickly Google this. So we got spring boot mock MVC perform post with body. Where are we? Mock it perform. Content is the one we're looking for. Content, it's JSON. There we go. So .content, and then this is where we're going to specify our data to be sent. Now there's two ways you could do this. Either you could create the data objects and cast them in, and then use the Jackson library that's shipped with Spring to convert the Java objects back to JSON to then submit into it, or you can just take the route that I think most people do, where you just have a static string, or static final string, should I say, and it's just called, like, say for example, good registration JSON, and then we just oops, how do I spell it right? There we go. And then we just put in here like we would for a normal JSON object. So we go, if we get our registration body up, so you see, you kind of just build this up in JSON and put that as a string, and then you would just put this down here like that. That's nice, but the annoying thing with that is that, when this code changes, so for example, in your registration body, you add a new field that's required, your JUnit all of a sudden will start failing, and it'll be quite annoying to go into all these strings, because you can see here you'd have to do / new field / quote colon and / quote. It gets really annoying. The nicer way to do it is by building an object. Now, how do we do that? So we've got registration body equals new registration body. Okay, and then we've got object mapper, and then mapper, and we go equals new object mapper. Now, Object Mapper is from the Jackson library. Jackson is a library specifically for converting objects into different formats. So, like for example, you want to move Java objects into JSON, or JSON into Java object, or Java objects into XML. Jackson can do that. So what we want to do now is we've got our body. So now let's have a look. So what do we need to test in our body? Well, firstly, it says that you can't have several of these fields not null, right? So let's test that first, shall we? So body.set, and we've got all these fields. So let's do username will be the one we set to null, and then we'll set all the other ones to correct things. So this will be authentication controller test $test register at junit.com. Body.set first name I think we can actually just first name, body.set last name to last name, and body.set password to password 123. And then what we do here is we do mapper dot write value as string, and then you give it the body object. And then when we do that, we should expect, and we should then expect what is it we're expecting? We're expecting a status is, let's just import that quickly. Status is http status dot, and now I actually can't remember what it is. I think it might be internal server error, because we haven't done proper exception handling yet for that. Let's give that a go and see what happens, because that's the easiest way to tell, is we just try it. And if it fails, like before, we can see what the response is, so we know how to handle it and be able to pick it out. So here we go. We got 415 is HTTP. So if we go into HTTP status, the class, and search for 415, it's unsupported media type. So there you go. Oh, that's probably because we haven't set the content type. So what we need to do in our post here, we need to do set content type media type dot JSON, application JSON. There we go. And let's try that again. So it's running. And what did we get instead? We actually got 400. Now 400 is bad request. So that's what we're going to search for. Now the reason why we're just going to do a status check here, and we're not going to go into it, because for example, we can see inside of the body should have contained what was wrong with it, but it didn't. Why is that? Bad request. Auth register. We're doing a post, giving it the body. So what's wrong with it? This. So let's open up Postman and see what we get. So this is the kind of like the double, the kind of fighting battle you kind of play with unit testing sometimes, is that it is quite difficult, because you've got to go kind of work between two things to figure out what it actually is, and then you can kind of work the code around that. So I'm trying to communicate, and if I just start the application itself here, there we go, that one, and start. So I'm going to post to the register a body with null username, and if I send that out, 403 forbidden. That's interesting, because it shouldn't be trying to reject us on that level, should it? Oh, here we go. Registration with 2 errors. Fail field in error object registration body on field username. Reject value null. So our log here is showing the reason why it's rejecting it, but for whatever reason we're getting 403 forbidden when we try and click in here now, which is a bit odd, really. I think I'm getting slightly confused by this. So I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to quickly just pause the recording here. I'm going to try and figure out what's going on and I'll come back. Okay, and I'm back after that. Sorry about that. So after a bit of investigation, I figured out that we actually have an existing bug in our code that we never knew of. So when you use Spring, if you don't if you don't do proper error handling, so if we look at, for example, authentication controller, when this @valid is next to our registration body, what that does is it tests the registration body object for those @not null, etc. And if it doesn't suffice, it throws an exception. And because that exception is risen in here, it's risen up to the Spring level. And what Spring does is when it receives an exception, it will actually theoretically redirect the user to a /error page. And because, if you remember in our web security config class, which is under the security package, we specify certain pages to be allowed for non-verified users, where some pages are not allowed for unverified users. So what's happening is we didn't have this /error in here. So I've added that, and now when we hit send, you can see we get our, with a null username, you can see we get our method argument not valid exception. That's raised by Spring using that @valid. So that returns a request 400. And when we're in our authentication test, bad request is number 400. So now if we try and run this again, I would hope that we receive the bad request. So here we go, Spring's loading, and there we go. See, so now our test is working now. So I apologise for that confusion there, because it even got me for a second. So yeah, so that's what's going on here. So what I was going to go back to saying before, now these tests that we're writing for these around the validation and other bits, I'm only doing these as kind of temporary template tests. The reason being is because when we do this, and I was going to allude to this whole part about the Spring raising exceptions. You can see here the response we get isn't very user friendly, let alone developer friendly. I mean, it's going to be very difficult for a developer to have to use this trace to pull out all these things. I mean, you can come down here, it's got loads of bits and pieces, but this is all redundant information that no one needs to see. So what we want to do is proper exception handling, but that'll be another episode down the line. So when we do that episode, we'll come back and refine this. But this proves that, if we don't put the username, it won't pass. So now let's do the others. So we can do body.set username, and we'll give it a proper username now. So just wrap that, and then body.set email, and we'll set email to null, because email is going to be a bad thing again. So there we go, we can test that again. And this is going to get very repetitive, so what we can do... Oh no, actually, we're not going to do that, sorry. God, I'm stumbling over myself a few times today, aren't I? So yeah, we'll set the email again, so we can just do that, copy that down here. And then we'll do body.set password to null, and that should also return our bad request. And this is going to get quite large, but you can kind of get the idea, so I'm just going to quickly do it. If we go back to our registration body, we can see all of the fields are supposed to be not blank and not null. So we can do this quite quickly. So it's also the first name. So if we copy the password and then body.set first name to be null, and then we do body.set first name. I'll just copy it from up here, and then body.set last name null. This is a rather large JUnit, but it's doing some very basic stuff. I mean, the thing is, if you were confident enough that app validation was working, and that you were confident that they were being typed in the code correctly, then I suppose you wouldn't need to do all of this. But from my experience, it's best to do it just in case, So there we go, last name, and then we also needed to test these for when you do it with a blank. So we'll just briefly do that now. So copy these lines, drop them down, put a blank string in there, and then we're just going to copy and paste all of these and do the same. Oh, well, I copied that in the wrong place. There we go. I'm just going to double check I've done this right. Here we go. Set username. I don't want that there. There we go. Right. Then we done the email, and then the password. So I'm going to do comments in here after the episode, which will make it a bit more clear, like just highlighting this is the password where we're testing the password, this is where we're testing the first name, just makes it a bit more clear. But I don't want to waste time on the video doing that because it's going to take forever otherwise. So we can now test that. And then at the very end, we're going to do set. So we now have something that we think should be a valid object. So we're just going to copy this one more time, but this time we're going to return HTTP status OK value. And now let's not forget that when we call this register method, it's going to try and send an email. So that means that if you remember in our user service test, we have our, just going to minimize this, we have this register extension up here for the Greenmail stuff. So we're going to want to copy that and drop that into this test class here. And then fingers crossed, we should be able to just run this test and it should run all okay. So there we go, and it's doing its work. Loads of work done, and there we go. All our tests passed, even creating the user at the end, which is fantastic news. So there we go. That's the bulk of it done. There's also some other bits in here we can test. So there's about the patterns. So you got password there. You've also got the username size there, whether it's an email. What I'm going to do is, because this is going to get lengthy otherwise, I'm just going to put in a to-do here. And we're going to do test password characters, test password characters, test password characters, and password characters, username length, and email validity. And that is going to be everyone's homework. So you think of this basically, and just try and see how you would test this, right? Because I mean, I'm not going to write every single line of code under the sun in these JUnits because this isn't being used in a production environment. We don't need to. But you write these. If you struggle, then maybe you can comment and we can discuss how to do it. If it really is struggling, then we can do it. But these are pretty simple, so it's kind of just set the password. For example, one of the rules of the password is, remember we said it has to be at least 6 characters. Well, put in a password that's 5 characters, make sure that fails. And then put one in that's between 6 and 32, make sure that passes. And then put one in that's 33 and make sure that fails. So you can do that sort of testing. So that's just the registration method, and you can see that's quite large, but obviously it starts to get a bit easier when we go into the, if I go back to the authentication controller, you can see when we get in the login one, it's going to be slightly easier because there's not much logic here. that we haven't already tested, mind you. And then you've also got the verify email one, and that one really is kind of questionable if even you should bother testing it, because again, we've tested this. We know that that's going to be okay. We know that that's going to be an okay response. There's no validity around the token. So, I mean, what is there really to test? And I'm happy to take everyone's points of view. If you think there's a better way of testing the @valid, or if you think there's a better way of doing these sort of tests, please do comment below, and I'm always up for a discussion. But anyway, I think because that's probably a good few minutes that this tutorial has been, this episode has been. So I'm going to call the episode here. In the next episode, we're going to tackle the unit tests with authentication required, so that we can verify not only that the verification is working, but also that that when we pull up data for that given user, that we're pulling that user's data and not someone else's data. So that's what we'll hit in the next episode. As always, there is a playlist in my channel with all of the videos for the series in order, so feel free to just jump into that and watch it. Feel free to like, subscribe, and comment any feedback. It's always helpful, not just to me, but for other people. And I will see you in the next episode.